So what I want to do today, for the most part, is talk about what is not possible. In fact, that's the title here, Identifying the Not Possibles. I want to spend a little bit of time understanding places where innovation has taken place, not necessarily that any of us here in the room have been involved in, but things that many of us, or maybe most of us, know about, and then step back from that and say, what exactly was not possible? What did we think wasn't possible before that? And what did we figure out? What did we get past? Because in my work, I have found over and over that often the greatest barrier to change is not technology, it's not the availability of financing, it isn't anything really visceral or real or practical or much less, the physical world. It is simply that we are having trouble imagining what could be different. And so I want to give a number of examples, and I'm actually going to, in a few minutes, I'm going to have you help me on this and actually say, okay, that thing happened. What was not possible before that? And so we'll go through a number of those in a couple of minutes. One other thing by way of introduction, I want to emphasize what it is I've been doing over the last decade. Carrie's bio of me was covered most of it, but I want to give it a little bit of context. All of my work is really as a consultant. I mean, I'm in the business world. Even when I work with people in government and higher education, it's often with the people who are business people. But the frame for all of my work is sustainability. It is these very, very big picture combined economic, social, and environmental challenges. A cousin of mine sent me this New Yorker cartoon a few years ago. And you see an important-looking guy in front of a boardroom. He says, "And so, while the end-of-the-world scenario will be rife with unimaginable horrors, we believe the pre-end period will be filled with unprecedented opportunities for profit." And my cousin said, that's you, right? You're making profit off doom. Isn't that it? Isn't that your business? So not exactly. I'd prefer not to think of it that way. But the part that is real is actually the profit. I think it's easy in the business world to lose track of the fact that all the crazy stuff happening to the environment and things that really bind people to the environment and have to do with human well-being and economic well-being really actually provide boundless business opportunities and ways for firms and communities and households to do better. So you'll hear lots of pessimism on the environment. I mean, all of us are going to be pessimistic at one point or another, but I'm actually very optimistic, and I want to share that with you. That's really the spirit of many of the examples that I'll give today. But before I dive in, I actually want to ask you all to do something. In your packets or from a neighbor, pull out a piece of paper. See if you have some pieces of paper. It doesn't have to be big. It can be like even half a sheet. Share with your neighbors if they don't have one, but you'll want a little bit of blank space. Find someone right near you and see if you can pair up. And I'd like you to draw a picture of your neighbor. Okay. So great work, and lots of laughter. So I heard some apologies, actually. So this is what happens when we do this as adults. I take this as proof that we fear the judgment of our peers. We are often a little bit tentative about being creative, especially being creative in front of other people. And this is a fear of a certain kind of risk-taking behavior that is acquired. Right? When you do this experiment with children, they're enthusiastic to share their results. Right? They're excited to show you what they have. And I think that's important because we learn not to be creative, or we learn to be guarded about it. We learn not to be innovative. We learn to hesitate and worry about how it will be received. I think this is very profound because much of the work in the corporate world that I'll discuss actually has to do with losing some of that, and not just returning to a childlike state, but really to figure out how do you engage in play and creativity in a way that you can direct toward problem solving. Children are good at this. We were all children once. We were good at it. We need to learn some of that again. So let me give you sort of the big arc of the talk, and then I'm going to say a little bit on sustainability itself, and then come back to these examples. And I look forward to seeing the artwork later. So I want to say something about how change happens, I'm going to give a bunch of these examples about what I'm calling these not possibles, these things that actually have turned out to be possible, but I'm going to go through those. And then I'm going to give just a couple at the very end that are sort of some of my favorites, I would say, that I want to share with you that may seem a little bit more out there and controversial. The examples that I could give, I'm going to give them from a number of places, but they'll be from very familiar things. They're not necessarily super duper high tech or really difficult inventions. They're things that are very visceral: transportation, housing, energy, agriculture, consumer goods, manufacturing. So they should feel familiar. They should feel like they're from contexts that we know and contexts that we often participate in as consumers. So with that as backdrop, let me just say something about sustainability itself, and then I'll return to this innovation theme. But I think it's important to ground people in this. We could spend a lot of time on it, but I want to give just a little bit of time. So occasionally in settings like this, people say, hey, make sure you summarize what's wrong with the environment. And I say, that sounds almost impossible, right? There are so many interesting ways in which human activities, people meeting human needs, are compromising the systems we rely on ecologically. But I want to give just one example, and I offer this as a gateway to a big picture, and if you want more information on this, chase me down later. But it's really just the idea of a state shift. And a state shift is a term from the science community when you talk about moving from one situation to another, often irreversibly, where the rules of the game have changed, the circumstances have changed, the way the system operates has changed, and again, often in a way where you can't go back. So when you think about moving from liquid water to ice, that's a state shift. It's a dramatic change. The dynamics of it are totally different. That's fortunately a reversible one. But lots of things aren't when you alter ecological systems, including ones that you might be depending on. Often you can't go back. So I was very struck, knowing the idea of a state shift, I was very struck by some research less than a year ago in Nature, one of the preeminent science journals. And to say that there were authors is almost an understatement. You can see it's a whole team of people who contributed to this synthesis research. And they had the rather alarming news of approaching a state shift in Earth's biosphere. And this article is extremely detailed and really brings together hundreds of pieces of academic and technical work. But the bad news really sort of comes down just to this. That's right, I'm giving you bad news early. We'll have good news in a little bit. But human beings now dominate the Earth, changing it in ways that threaten its ability to sustain us and other species. That sounds like a big sweeping statement, but they were extremely granular about it, and they actually looked at several different types of change, each one of which seems kind of local or regional, but which aggregate to this bigger picture. And the best summary they have is this field of text. I'm not going to make you read that. That would be cruel and unusual on a PowerPoint slide. But it really comes down to very simple things. And again, if you don't quite believe the summary, approach me later on this. Changing land use, the nearby effects of changing land use, changing whole landscapes, changes from accumulated impacts, that often means things like runoff or air pollution, burning fossil fuels causing pollution with other impacts in other places, and then the best part, changes that are far from humans, things that happen as a result of accumulated human impacts, but very far from where humans live and spend most of their time. So temperature change as a result of global warming, changing the dynamics for plants and animals, and then warming, melting glaciers, threatening water supplies. So this all sounds very depressing, and it is, and it also sounds like the environment. But the final thing I want to stress on this that the article does a good job on is that this is not environment. I think often when we hear the word environment, we think the thing that you drive up to the edge of on vacation to look at, or maybe the thing you see pictures of far away. It conjures up things like green, or the planet, or this frog that appears in the article. And I think that's very misleading, right? So I'm going to cross it out. Someone complained the other day that I crossed out the frog. So I kind of left a little bit of room for it there. But I think the point is what I stated at the beginning. Humans now dominate the Earth, changing it in ways that threaten its ability to sustain us and other species. And in fact, let's just cross off other species. Let's pretend we don't care about them for a moment. Threaten its ability to sustain us. So when people ask you about sustainability and that environmental part, what do you mean by that? I think we want to keep reconnecting it for people to systems that actually sustain us, systems that we rely on. I think that's an absolutely crucial point, because as long as it's something separate from us, people will find it very difficult to prioritize, very difficult also to relate to. So that's all I'm going to say on sustainability per se, but all the examples I'm going to give to you in a moment actually, I think you'll see, relate back to these systems. So, back to this big picture, let me say something about innovation, and then we'll get into these examples. So, there's a tremendous amount of innovation thinking out there. I couldn't possibly summarize all this for you, but I want to give just a few things that I think have been most powerful for me, not written with sustainability in mind necessarily at all. These are really more broadly for a business audience. I just want to name a couple of these and get a show of hands to see if people have run across this. So Clayton Christensen's work, disruptive innovation. Anybody? Okay, we got. I see a couple of hands. The Learning Organization, sort of the phrase associated with Peter Senge. Anybody? Yeah. Okay. A few more hands. Has anyone studied Everett Rogers' work on the diffusion of innovation? And you've probably seen it, even if you think you haven't studied it, thank you, because it's sort of early work on how inventions get out into the economy. How about any of the work by the people associated with IDEO, by Tim Brown or Tom and David Kelly? Any of this work? Okay, actually more hands, that's great. So the work on design thinking and creativity, I think, is also really important, and in fact it's from Tim Brown that I stole the exercise that you did at the beginning, where you drew each other. I don't want you to think I came up with that. Now, I would say to pursue sustainability, we have to do all these things. We have to learn about the dynamics of human organizations and so on. But I'm going to focus on one very small piece, and that is how we think about things that are new. How do we decide what is or isn't possible? So let me take just a moment inside that process of change. So many of these theories of innovation and diffusion talk about inventing a new technology and then spurring the adoption of the technology. And you'll often see these bell curves with early adopters to laggards and everybody in between. And there's some sort of feedback loop, often with things that are really techy, where the increased scale leads to higher costs, higher quality and lower costs. And so there's some sort of feedback loop there where adoption leads to dynamics that spur more adoption, and you get that. But I think in much of the work I see on things that bring sustainability into the business world, there's this challenge of early adoption or even late adoption, and there seem to be special barriers. And I would pose the question, how do we get people just to do something different? It's really more about change than it is about sustainability per se. So imagine the following feedback loop. This is one I think you hope to make happen in your organizations with new technologies, new techniques, new ways of doing things. We realize that things are possible, they could be different. We reconsider what we do or how we do it. Then we start doing different things, we start innovating. Even if it's not invention, it's doing things that are new. And then we get results and we build confidence in the ability to do more of this, seeing that there are more possibilities and so on. And I think many of you have probably experienced this sort of thing in your organizations, but you've also probably experienced this barrier right here. Just how do we get people to see that things could be different? How do we catalyze this part? That's really the question I want to ask. How do we realize how much is possible, and in particular, how do we align it with the greatest challenges we face as a society? And part of the answer for me, the part I'll focus on now, is to be totally clear about what it is we think that is not possible. Often it's easy to brush a possibility aside, brush a suggestion or a proposal aside by saying, no, that's not possible. So I want to dig into a few things and say, what exactly was it that was not possible? So together we're going to spend a few minutes here identifying the not possibles, as I say. So I'm going to show you an example of something that's innovative. You're going to tell me what was not possible before it got figured out. And I'll help you with the first few. I'll actually do a couple of easy ones so you see what I mean. So first of all, we'll never make a transistor smaller than a few millimeters, which of course is enormous, right? So what was it that got broken by? This turned out not to be true. What was it that changed? There's even a one-word answer you could give for this. What's that? Microchips, silicon, if you're sort of sciencey. If you like the periodic table, you might have been thinking of saying silicon. Okay, sure. How about people need to feel a book in their hands before they'll buy it? Well, you laugh, but if you go back and look at the early days of Amazon.com, people dismissed this as a niche, outrageous, who would buy a book? Now, of course, people sometimes do feel the book in their hands in someone else's house or in a bookstore and then order it on Amazon, but increasingly they don't at all, actually. So, again, in retrospect, it seems obvious, but at the time, it didn't seem obvious at all. So, in that spirit, let's go through a few of these, and I'd like to hear your sense of what it was that wasn't possible. How many of you are familiar with Zipcar? Okay, yeah, show of hands. Okay, only about a third, so almost half. So Zipcar is a national company that's a car-sharing company. Essentially, instead of you have a subscription, and you can go and use cars. You can pick them up at a Zipcar station and drop them off at a Zipcar station. In the cities where they operate, they typically are based in places where people want to go in and out, or they're in many places in the city, and you can go to enough different locations that the network is good enough for you to get where you need to go. And a little bit of walking at the front end, a little bit of walking at the back end, but essentially you're still using the car. So what seemingly fundamental truth does this challenge? You have to own a car to use a car. You have to own a car to drive a car. And in fact, this was the criticism of Zipcar early on. I want to be clear, Zipcar is not exactly a tiny little niche. This shows the locations that it has nationally. Anybody know the nearest Zipcar location? This might be easy for a couple people in the room who work near it. Yeah, at Creighton, right. There it is. I thought I'd show a map just so you didn't think I was lying. Well, I mean, I guess Zipcar could still be lying, but it's been confirmed. So these things are everywhere. Avis Rent-A-Car just bought Zipcar for, I don't know, a couple of $1 billion. So this is, I think, going mainstream in an interesting way. But mainstream in particular cases, but still challenging a fundamental assumption. You have to own a car in order to use a car. When I learned about Zipcar, I thought, okay, maybe this can work for cars, but you probably couldn't pull this off for something else. I'll just mention as an aside, actually, you have to own a bike to use a bike turns out not to be true either. There are bike sharing systems now all over the world, and many of these have thousands of stations and tens of thousands of bicycles. In Montreal and Washington, D.C. last year, there were over 4 million and 2 million rides, respectively, on their bike sharing systems. Has anyone used a bike share system someplace in the world? Okay, just call out where it was. Omaha? Okay, actually, I was going to say the ones, a few of the ones I know about that I tried to get ones that were sort of close. I don't know if Minneapolis counts as close, but closer than Montreal at least. But yeah, these are now in a number of places. So did you say there's a bike share system in Omaha? Okay, so how many people have used it? Just out of curiosity? Okay, all right. Go up and ask her later. But again, fundamental thing, seems like you really would probably have to own that. Actually, these things work pretty seamlessly. So some more examples. This is a local nonprofit a few miles from where I live in Eugene, Oregon, called Bring Recycling. And Bring used to be kind of an extremely well-organized junkyard, and then it reinvented itself about a dozen years ago as a place where it took cast-offs from the construction industry and that were still usable, and organized them very well and cleaned them up and sorted them and essentially offered them back to builders. People said that this would never work as a business model, but actually their reinvention has led to far more success than they had before. What does this seem to challenge? I'll tell you what I heard from people at the time. They said, builders don't throw away valuable stuff, or at least not enough that you could build a business around it. A few people laughed. Are there builders in the room? Home builders? So, yeah, I mean, so this is tremendously innovative. I don't know if you'd have anything like this in Nebraska. Oh, you do have something like this in Nebraska. Okay. How many people know of eco-stores? Okay. So I think, again, the idea that what was in the trash was actually valuable enough to build a business around was new. Okay, so those are warm-up ones. I think those are kind of easy. Let's do some that seem a little weirder. Recent article from the Los Angeles Times, concept of an untethered office takes root. Shared office space, no designated offices, like no individual offices in this building. It's quick backstory. This experiment was done by a group called C.B. Richard Ellis, one of the largest property owners and managers in the United States. They own a lot of buildings that Fortune 500 companies inhabit and lease from them. They're big into not just renting people space, but in helping people manage space portfolios, to the tune of tens of millions of square feet of commercial buildings. And when they did this in one of their major Los Angeles offices, right? You don't think it sounds amazing actually that they did it themselves. They didn't just have one of their clients did it. They did this themselves. It was a 200-person office, and there were no exceptions. Right? There weren't 4 corner offices set aside. This was for everybody. There was a little bit of pushback, but they pulled it off. What does this seem to challenge?
Your office is your territory and a status indicator of your position.
Yeah, I don't know if you heard that. So your office is your territory. It's a status indicator. Absolutely. Anything else? That's right. That's right. Well, and actually, this article, if you're interested, if you have to deal with space management, or you've thought about, or you sit in a position in your organization where you can think about what your space looks like over the long haul, there are a lot of anecdotes in this story that help people. Essentially, you hear the process of how they assembled an office where people do have space to think, where people can perform the functions they have. But ultimately, what they challenged is essentially what you said. I need my own office. And it turns out they didn't. And in fact, people have done this in some other countries, mainly in Europe, but actually they've found that if you do it right, it isn't just a matter of sort of tearing down all walls. There are plenty of walls in this office. There are some separate rooms to go work in. There are conference rooms and individual offices that you can occupy for the day, but you don't get to own a particular office in perpetuity, essentially, that is just yours. And it has changed the dynamics of the space. But again, it challenged a very fundamental assumption that was supposedly not possible. You couldn't do without offices. Let me go in reverse order for some of these. I want to start with a couple that are a little bit nerdier, so closer to my heart. I like graphs. I'm going to show you a graph. Actually, my wife was looking over my shoulder as I was working on this presentation over the last couple of weeks, and she said, "You're not going to have too many graphs, are you?" She's always worried that I'll have too many graphs, and I said, "Oh, no, not more than 10." She said, "I think that's too many." So we have just a few, so you can count them to make sure I don't overdo it. But I wanted to show you one on this topic because I think this is still in our thinking. You need more energy for economic growth. So I want to say a couple of things that challenge this. So if you look across countries, and this is essentially the developed world, different parts of the developed world for the most part, you see that the amount of GDP, the amount of economic activity that different countries squeeze out of a unit of energy is very different. And you see we come in last on this list. We're not actually last in world rankings, but among countries that have similar economies or something we might aspire to as well, we're not doing well. So what you see here is that other countries get a lot more economy out of a unit of energy. So I think just saying we need more energy in order to have economic growth is a little problematic. So as you can see, other countries have figured out how to get more economic output out of their energy use. Now, so when I show this to some crowds, people say, "Oh, those are other countries. You can't compare us to other countries." Okay, so forget this slide. This still only counts as one graph because you didn't believe the other countries. Let me show you this for the United States. Energy consumption per dollar of GDP. If you go back to 1950 and look at the 20 years after that, what you see is that actually more energy for more economic growth held true. The ratio of energy to economic activity was about constant. It actually went down a little bit, but you might not have noticed at the time because the economy was growing pretty quickly in the 50s and most of the 60s, and the result was that economy and energy use were both soaring. But then what happened was 40 years ago, the global oil crisis, Arab oil embargo, and real change in the way we think about energy and the way we use it. And we subsequently have had a couple of generations of decline in the energy intensity of economic activity. I think this is a mostly untold story in the U.S. economy. You hear about a little bit of energy efficiency here and there, but if you say to someone, oh, we could be twice as efficient, people say that doesn't sound right. Really? Maybe a little more efficient. Maybe somewhat more efficient, but double? But of course, this is from the Energy Information Agency of the U.S. Department of Energy. They project not only that they describe what has happened to date, but they also project that this will happen again, another halving of energy use over the next 30 years. So, and this is without dramatic restrictions on the way we use fossil fuels and that sort of thing. It's not just policy driving this. This is often technology and markets. I think there's a corollary to this. This sounds very big picture on a high level. What does this mean at the individual or household or firm level? Right? This is very big picture, but ultimately that big picture is just assembled of all of us and the things we're doing. So I think there's a corollary that's something like my process is as efficient as it can be. So that to me is a not possible, and I hear that from many people. Hey, we're about as efficient as we can be. Maybe a few light bulbs here and there, but I think what we know is that's not true. We can almost always do better. Another example on energy, briefly. This actually isn't last weekend, like this last weekend, but last weekend from you can see late May of last year. Half of Germany was running on solar power. How many people saw this headline? Does anyone notice this? I saw this sort of out in the media a bit. This is great. So the circumstances were that Germany, as some of you may know, has deployed more solar power than any other country in the world, especially as a share of its energy system. And it was a mild weather day, so there wasn't a lot of heating necessary in the country. It was a weekend, so industrial activity was down a little bit just because people weren't in their factories, and it was sunny. And that all coincided to put over 50% of the electricity on the grid as solar. What does this challenge? Germany's economy did not subsequently collapse. I should add that detail. What does this challenge? Anybody? What's that? Solar isn't dependable? Maybe? Yeah, can't run the grid on solar and renewables. Yeah, so those are great. I have a couple, one of which overlaps with that. One, I would say you need mostly baseload power. You just need it. And the reason I say it that way, for those of you who deal with the electric grid at all, is that we often think about it this way. We need the stuff that we can rely on all the time. Well, actually, Germany and other countries relying more on renewables have figured out how to shape their use to match what's generated rather than the other way around. So there's actually quite a bit we can do. We may not need mostly baseload power. We may be able to do it quite differently. And then, in line with what several of you said, you can't integrate a lot of intermittent renewables, as they're called. You can't do it. And so I see in different parts of the United States, including my own region in the Northwest, people say, oh, you just can't integrate more than about 10% renewables in this part of the grid. Or you can't integrate more than 20% renewables in this part of the grid. You can't do more than 30% renewables. And so all of this, it's really not a question of that you can't do it. It's you have to ask what is necessary to make that happen. How many of you have heard of EPEAT? It's a certification for, okay, great, about 10 people. A certification for computers and certain other consumer electronics, basically computers, laptops, monitors, and now televisions. So it used to be the case before EPEAT was around, about 10 years ago, that lead, cadmium, chromium, and PVC and some other things were ubiquitous in computers and electronics. These were everywhere. They're in virtually every single product. And since EPEAT, working directly with manufacturers in the United States and elsewhere that manufacture components and whole computers, put EPEAT together. Now actually there are more than 2,000 products of different kinds available without these and other toxins. So what was the change? What was not possible at the outset? What would you say? What's that? Lead-free solder. not possible? We need those components in chemicals. That's how we make it. We need those to make these products. That's, of course, far more broadly relevant, beyond just computers. But we need those things. So turned out not to be true. And EPEAT was hard early on. It wasn't easy to figure this out. But as I said, the number of products has ballooned. And now it's in virtually every product class in IT that you can get this stuff, from laptops to thin clients. So this will be another one of my graphs. So for those keeping score, this is number 2. Remember, I only counted those first 2 as the same one before. But I wanted to give a couple of examples related to the car because of its ubiquity and its importance. So this is the nerdiest one. So I put the hardest one in the middle here. But I want you to imagine these 2 axes here. On the vertical axis, you have miles per gallon, and that's your proxy for overall efficiency of the car. And on the horizontal axis, you have 0 to 60 time, which is kind of performance, the way we have defined it as consumers in the United States. So I want you to look at 2 periods here since the early 1970s. So the first period looks like this, and each dot is a year. You see 1975 and 1980 labeled, so this goes up through the early mid-1980s. So what's the story there? You see how 0 to 60 time stayed pretty much the same over this period. In other words, sort of the power, the performance of the cars didn't change a lot. But look at the dramatic gains in fuel efficiency, right? Pretty much straight up. Started to plateau a little bit in the 80s. And then from the mid-80s up until just a few years ago, the trajectory looks like this. So this is really 2 stories of technological change in the same industry, in 2 distinct periods. And it's actually striking how distinct it was. So the first one was really driven by prices and policy, increasing fuel efficiency for a little more than a decade, and then a couple of decades of quite steadily improving performance. But if you look back and you say, this was the change, these 2 big chunks of change, there's almost no stagnation here. You have to give the automakers real credit for that. 2 big periods of substantial technological change, roughly a doubling of fuel efficiency, near doubling of fuel efficiency, and then a tremendous improvement, sort of not quite, but almost a halving of 0 to 60 time. So we sort of, over the long haul, had our cake and ate it too. But what might you have said was not possible, either starting in the mid-70s or starting in the 1980s? How would you talk about that? What's that?
You cannot have both.
Cannot have both? You can't have that performance cake, and you can't have performance and efficiency at the same time? Yeah, I have to use a lot of gas to go fast. Apparently that's not true. Well, though I don't encourage you to sort of think about fuel efficiency as you're gunning it. I think there still is a little bit of a trade-off there as the pedal is going down. But I've heard people say for many years that engine efficiency, internal combustion engine efficiency, is pretty much maxed out. So that people have said some version of this all along the way. They certainly said it when the first corporate average fuel economy standards were passed. And many people said it again with new fuel economy rules that were passed just in the last few years. But I think we should look at this and be pretty cautious about that and see that actually we're capable of a tremendous technological change. It's important when people talk about the stagnation of fuel economy to realize that maybe fuel economy stagnated, but technological change didn't. We still got something else out of the internal combustion engine. Maybe it wasn't the thing that I most wanted out of the internal combustion engine or that others wanted, but the point is we continued with technological change over this period. So that sounds like I'm being mean to the automakers complaining about fuel efficiency, so let me say something that's nicer. I want to say something about waste. Just a quick show of hands, how many people have followed the work by automakers in the US and elsewhere to achieve zero waste facilities? Quick show of hands. Okay, just a handful. So yeah, I have not found this covered that much in the media, even though this did make it into the New York Times this year. But I've been really impressed and frankly totally surprised by this. So 15 Ford plants, over 100 GM plants, and 10 Honda plants. Actually, it's just 10 Honda plants in the United States. are zero waste. I have it in quotes because it's not actually zero, but it's essentially around 1%. 1% from the facility. And I think there are people here from Frito-Lay, is that right, today? Raise your hands if you're from Frito-Lay, not to put you on the spot. Or don't raise your hands. I saw that no hands went up, so maybe, okay. So there are unidentified secret people from Frito-Lay here today. Sorry, I don't mean, but I know that Frito-Lay and a number of other manufacturers and food processors have actually had similar achievements with their factories. And the word actually I don't think has gotten out. So that's why I wanted to plug your efforts. But people getting well below 10%, below 5% for waste generation for their facilities. Ford has a 5-year goal of reducing its waste per vehicle starting in 2011 by 40%. And I think the waste per vehicle might be the best measure, because then it's not just an individual factory, but across the whole value chain. So that's pretty impressive. I want to be clear about this, what I think this example means. I mean, I think, first of all, manufacturing just generates waste. I've heard people say this in a number of settings, including current and former clients. You just can't make stuff without generating waste. And I think this turns that on its head a little bit, because it turns out that you can actually do something. You can design out a lot of waste, and you can do something with this. But this is not really a waste story. 3 quick points on this. First of all, it's very recent. It's happened, in the grand scheme of manufacturing overnight. You see here, GM achieved its first zero waste status factory in 2011. This was reported, so this is just a couple of years ago. It's also profitable. GM made $1 billion last year by recycling its waste. Does anyone know what GM's profits are overall? Or about $7.5 billion. What do you call something? What do you call an activity when 1/7 of your profit comes from it? You call it a line of business, right? So this looks like a line of business for GM is recycling, impressively. And then I think the best part about it is the things that came out of the mouths of the GM spokespeople, and I don't normally say this about GM spokespeople, were really forward-thinking and impressive. So they were really clear that the best way to reduce waste is to avoid producing it. So this has been reported over and over as a zero waste story. This sounds more like a pollution prevention story. This sounds more like a life cycle materials management story to me, that has completely challenged this assumption that manufacturing just generates lots of waste. And I think the best part, I didn't highlight it, but you see farther in that paragraph, Sharon Boswell, the spokeswoman, said, I'd actually like to see our revenue from recycling go down. Right? In other words, I'd like to see us not buy so much stuff that we end up having to recycle eventually. So they're definitely thinking about it right. So a couple more examples, and I want to make these, some of these are a little weirder. I'm trying to have a mix of ones that are sort of challenge what we know and then are quite different. How many people know Airbnb? Raise your hand if you know Airbnb. Okay, only about a dozen people. Let me describe this. So this is an online platform that allows hosts, that's how they describe it, but it really just means people, an individual family, to rent out part or all of their own homes to visitors or travelers coming into town. So you could be going to Omaha or Eugene or Barcelona, and you could check online for homes that are available. You could see prices. Is it a detached cottage? Is it 1 bedroom? The person has a price, and you have, as a user of the network, some level of sort of likes or yeses from people whom you've rented from before or whom you've rented to. And so there's sort of a trust network the way there is with eBay. It sounds kind of crazy and niche-y, right? I first heard about Airbnb and I was like, no way. There's no way. There's no way. What I really meant was there's no way anyone's going to put up with my kids. But of course, this is no longer a niche phenomenon. There are over 500,000 listings worldwide. I don't know, 500,000 may not sound like a lot. I'll give some scale on that in a second. But this was founded 5 years ago, and now there are 500,000 listings. A hotel chain takes longer than that to build. For scale, Hilton globally has about 600,000 rooms. So 5 years ago, Hilton probably said, people will not rent out their extra bedrooms. That is not a challenge to our business model. That's certainly what I said. Fortunately, I'm not in the hotel business. Or I think Hilton is saying something different now. So again, this challenges what is or isn't possible. So is there anyone here who eats beef? That's a joke. Sorry, it's just, okay. Thank you. Some of you actually raised your hand. Some of you didn't bother. I know you I probably eat beef anyway. Maybe not everybody, but I just wanted to give an example that was a little bit closer to home. I did have a conversation. I told a couple people this already. I had a conversation on the way in. I sat next to someone from Lincoln who farms, has a job in Lincoln, but farms 80 acres. He said he grows corn and beans, and I said, I'm very excited to try some of your local protein. We don't really have it. It's not a local product where I'm from in Oregon, but I was really excited to have some tofu or edamame. He assured me that most of that gets sent to the coasts, that actually isn't for local consumption except by cattle. But I almost fell out of my chair when I saw the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef in the news about a year and a half ago. So again, this may look kind of niche-y, kind of small, but actually there's some very big players involved in this, trying to rethink the way beef is grown around the world. What does the full value chain of beef look like? And there are a number of challenges, a number of not possibles, I think, that go with this. I would have said off the bat that McDonald's wouldn't have been involved in it, but I obviously wasn't giving them enough credit. What else? What do you think is being challenged by this? Cargill's involvement is just as surprising. I think Cargill and World Wildlife Fund working together might not have been obvious, though actually if you look back over the last dozen years, there are increasingly some very encouraging partnerships between large environmental advocacy organizations and big corporate partners sitting down and problem solving together. I think the thing that's being challenged perhaps at its heart is we already raise cattle as well as we can. We know what we're doing. But I think we'll find something out. And I heard some people from the involved in the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, someone from World Wildlife Fund and someone from Darden, the restaurant, sort of the restaurant chain or basket of restaurant chains, including Red Lobster and others, speak at a conference a couple of weeks ago in California, and they're on a mission. I mean, they think they can do this better and improve the value chain environmentally, but also financially. So I want to do just two big final not possibles. Those were most of the examples, but I want to do a couple that I think are most challenging, and then can open up to questions. So the first is climate action on net costs. In other words, taking action on climate change is expensive. It will cost money. So I lied before when I said that I gave you the most punishing graph. Now I have the worst graph of all. But it is my third one, given my Arthur Anderson style accounting that I've done. So I don't actually want you to read all of these things. I'm just going to narrate it, and I actually want to leave this with you less as a graph and more as a picture and a metaphor. Does anyone recognize this graph? This has actually been out and about in corporate America. Okay, just two people. This was produced by McKinsey, the global consulting firm. And global GHG abatement cost curve just means all of the things we could do to address climate change, to reduce or displace or avoid greenhouse gas emissions globally over the next 20 years. And let me tell you what the two axes are. The width of each bar is the total emissions you could deal with, so some bars are a little wider than others. And the height of the bar is how much it costs. And it's there in euros per metric ton. That doesn't really matter. The point is just it's dollars or money to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So when you look at this graph, and don't worry about the whole width. The whole width actually, though, pretty closely corresponds to total greenhouse gas emissions globally. They're about 40 gigatons. That's the unit on the horizontal axis. And the vertical axis, as you see, is dollars. And you see where the zero is there on the vertical axis. So what is striking about this graph? What is striking about the shape and about where things are relative to the axes? Anybody? Yeah. something like 13 or 14 gigatons are below the zero line. So what does below the zero line mean? It means that those efforts are cost saving. And maybe they cost something up front, but over their lives, given the cost of capital, sort of overall net present value, they pay for themselves. So I would say that this is maybe the biggest insight that is missing from the political discourse on climate change in the United States. When we hear about what it would take to deal with climate change, we hear that it will be difficult, that it will be expensive, that it will damage, maybe destroy our lifestyles. But we don't hear that it will save money. And we don't hear, certainly, that most of what we would do on this front would save money for the foreseeable future. For scale, the United States is responsible for 6 or 7 gigatons. So this is 2 U.S. economies, approximately, of global greenhouse gas emissions that could be reduced cost effectively. I think that's missing. And that's actually, that's not just some hypothetical not possible. That is a not possible that's been part of our political discourse. So I would challenge that. And I'm not alone in seeing this, of course. There's a business organization called BICEP, Business for Innovative Climate and Energy Policy, that includes a large range of public and privately held companies. And they've essentially said, we should have national climate policy. It's very rare that groups of companies or individual companies come forward and ask for regulation, but this is one of the cases that's happened. For some reason, not everyone knows about BICEP. I think it should be maybe surprising news. Let me make the brands a little bit bigger so you can see them. At least some of them, I think, are recognizable. It's tilted a little toward consumer products companies, but not exclusively. There's some energy companies, there's some folks in manufacturing in there as well. But all of these are companies with $100 million in revenues or more. So I take this as pretty encouraging. I think it wouldn't have been possible, you wouldn't have thought it possible that companies could come together and ask for this sort of regulation. So let me just sum up. I gave you examples of technologies or ideas that once seemed crazy, but now have scaled or are growing quickly. And every one of them was once held back, or even it was unimaginable as a real business by something that was supposedly not possible. So what I put on your plate today is, what do we currently believe isn't possible in our business, in our community? Where might that be wrong? And what can we fix if we reimagine what is possible? All right. Thank you.